this is it, the ultimate disaster. Computers decide to set off nuclear missiles. And these are the warnings that are out there.
The baseline is designed to create an emotional response.
I've seen things you won't believe.
More human than human.
Make you question everything.
I wonder if you could test ChatGPT with one of your standard psychometric tests and see where it sits on its profile of person, and see if you could match that to a type of persona, and maybe run it a psychometric test across multiple public.
It would be interesting. I mean, I don't know if anyone who's in an interview process likes a psychometric test. I don't think if you had a choice, you would say, I want a psychometric test, because you are putting your faith in the machine. And this is what's happening and this is the trend that's going to happen in recruitment, is increasingly we are going to reduce the need for human assessment and bring in more automated robotic assessment of people, which will create massive efficiencies and speed. I can't remember who it was, but they I think it was Unilever, have been adopting AI in their recruitment massively over the last few years, and I think it's sped up their recruitment cycle by 75%, something like that. So there's no doubt it's effective, and potentially here we're talking about lower level, more junior roles. I guess if you start to look at the more senior and leadership type of roles, which are what ones I tend to do more work in, it's a different conversation. But what happens when we move the human down, upstream, the recruiter moves upstream, and at the opening stages and second and third stage, it's still no human involved. That's definitely efficient and speedy, but are you going to lose those people who the creative recruiter and the one that sees things that no one else sees will miss? And this is the thing: how do I codify how I see someone? Is it that I've got an algorithm somewhere that I'm using that I can't quite define, or am I just listening to what I feel my client needs and very carefully assessing that against the people I meet? And maybe that is just simple.
Recruitment's an interesting one, right? If you take recruitment as an isolated box and look, can we create productivity improvements within the process? It feels like there are tools to do that.
Yeah, loads.
But as you do that, and more of these companies leverage tooling, are they not normalizing their outcomes, and therefore there's no competitive advantage? And in some ways, as a startup founder, where I have trusted people I know to find networks of people that would somehow give me competitive advantage as a business by having them working within the company. If we're normalizing something as human as recruitment to a product, how does any organization that's leveraging that product find competitive advantage?
I don't know if they can. I mean, unless they're using better tools to do it. I think it's difficult, and I worry and care about that aspect, because I think recruitment is about bringing talent into businesses, and it is a human to human interaction. It's still about people. Again, at the junior or kind of bulk hiring level, maybe not, but for roles that are critical and strategic, and I focus on strategic commercial roles, go-to-market roles, where the people involved are more than just a skill set. There's a vast array of experience and ability and skills that they need to bring to the table that I don't know if an AI chatbot will figure out.
What are those things? What do you feel as though you offer that can't be found within an algorithm?
Honesty, integrity, EQ, and I don't know if AI has EQ yet. So how can it assess for EQ? In fact, I almost feel like I hope AI does not get EQ, because that's the part that us as humans can add. And if we can move forward into the future and work with AI, we need to bring something to the table that AI can't. So I don't think, and this is me as a kind of relative layperson in terms of technology, figuring out whether AI can assess for EQ, but I don't believe so, and I don't believe. I think there are ways of assessing honesty. You've got lie detectors. That's data, but I think it's pretty simple. You assess a role or an opportunity based on many aspects. It's not just binary. It's a landscape of needs and requirements, and you need to creatively connect those dots to a person. That's how I feel, and I'm sure there'll be people who say that's nonsense, that's absolutely wrong. You don't need to do that. You can do it. There are algorithms that can do this. But it's the trust, and like recruitment isn't just about here's a role, let's figure out what you need and go and find it. It's also about helping that person to understand it, helping that person to move into that process and to be comfortable, and supporting that and supporting your client to find the right people. These are all very human needs. These are counselling needs.
There's a spectrum of quality of recruiters, and I think there are people who or organizations that do operate a connect shotgun approach kind of volume play. I do think you bring something that's much more crafted and human to the process, as we were discussing earlier. The point on, I just wanted to come back to this point. The examples that you used, integrity, kind of trust, as a differentiator of the human recruiter over an AI process, it seems to be suggesting like that you perceive that AI systems do not have integrity. They do not have trust. Like why do you feel that?
I'm not saying that. Let's say ChatGPT doesn't have integrity. It depends what it's trained on. If it's trained on data that doesn't have integrity, or that's disingenuous, or that's wrong, the hallucinations, is that a lack of integrity, or is that just a lack of knowledge? I don't know. And I don't know if there's been a study. It'd be interesting to see if...
Isn't it interesting that someone in the world of AI has decided to identify where the thing goes wrong and makes a mistake? Let's be honest, it's where it gets it wrong.
Yeah.
It's where it gets it wrong, because this is a machine. It's a vectoring for words. It's getting things wrong. But rather than saying it's an error, rather than saying it's a computer error, like a word that we would associate with a machine that fails to do something in line with its code, someone somewhere has chosen a human word, hallucination, that is really about a human perceiving something that doesn't exist, which is a very human thing that, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I would say a hallucination or visualizing something is about neurotoxins and all sorts of different things going on in the brain. Who and why did somebody choose such a human word that describes something that doesn't actually exist, but a human is perceiving it to exist, fractional and algorithmic error. And that is a very, without being conspiracy theorist, to use a word like hallucination to hide the fact that a machine is just failing to do something within line its code, which is an error, is quite a manipulative thing to do in some ways. Because just by using the word hallucination, you're almost saying, oh, it's at this AI, this system has experienced something that I would know to be a very temporary, whereas actually it's broken and it's wrong. AI pilot having a hallucination, let's be honest, isn't appropriate.
Yeah.
But I wonder who chose that, because for me, it's created a perception of humanity within a machine that doesn't really have EQ, doesn't have intelligence. It's a machine learning model for language, but they've used this word hallucination. It feels manipulative when I actually analyze it. It does.
It's a great point. I think it's intentional because the people who've created it have probably have harnessed that word, and it's probably because they're excusing it. It's not its fault. Maybe it's. But
you're giving it an identity. You're giving it a human-esque identity, which it makes it feel much more powerful than in some ways that it actually is. Well,
this is the journey that AI is on: is to become as human as it possibly can until we hit AGI, and what does the long-term future look like? Is it humanoid robots walking around that are fully AI enabled, that look like humans, that can end up as your partner? I think that there's this journey of humanizing technology that we're going on.
What was your favorite 80s, 90s sci-fi movie?
Well, so many films, thinking back, were warning us of the dangers of AI.
We ourselves were shaped by it, which maybe is something that has triggered the whole focus on developing and creating it.
Which I think is a good thing. I think that there's, the warnings are out there. We talk about Terminator and everyone's saying, I don't want to end up with Skynet. I think it's probably quite useful that exists, that we can reference it. And I think, Elon Musk references that. I think about films like even 2001, HAL. This is it. Do we want our computers to turn into HAL and just tell us and control us? War Games, I used to love that film. This is it, the ultimate disaster. Computers decide to set off nuclear missiles. And these are the warnings that are out there.
There is a dislocation within the human psyche between our ability to use language and our ability to articulate things versus our actual intelligence and knowledge and capability. And it's almost independent slider bars where you have, an example was used in certain autistic spectrums who have phenomenal intelligence, but maybe dyslexia is an example where the ability to, and this is quite broad brush, and I know every individual has specific and uniqueness, which may be a point for discussion regarding AI, but the idea that you could have a great intelligence but a difficulty with natural language, and therefore the perception of you in line with the ability to use language. In humans, they extrapolate that into a perception of intelligence. So somebody with amazing oratory skills and articulation skills who maybe doesn't have that depth of knowledge and intelligence can be perceived as much more intelligent than they actually are.
Yeah.
And I think that this realization of the ability to articulate and use language versus actual intelligence and capability, I now have a much more critical lens when I'm watching the US elections and the political commentators and the people who are running for those, but also in your role, how do you cut through that conversational reputation and interaction to actually get to, okay, does this person have the depth of knowledge, the skills, the talent, the functional requirements for a role, even though they talk or articulate in a way that's just so compelling, which in itself is a skill. But do you kind of understand that dislocation? And it's in some ways it's why we think AI is probably cleverer than it actually is right now.
Yeah.
Because they've focused those learning languages on natural language.
I mean, there's a couple of things there. Just in terms of what is intelligence, I've thought about this a lot, and there was a point where I decided that memory was probably the greatest skill one could have. If you have a great memory, it's probably going to serve you incredibly well, because you're going to be able to join the dots very quickly, and you're going to be able to reference things in a conversation. It'll help just anything from rapport building to literally giving a key.
Memory is magic.
Memory,
In some ways.
maybe
when
magic.
we talked about
yeah.
magic, the person with the greatest memory in some ways has the ability to produce conversational magic.
Yeah, and you know, I see people like Stephen Fry talking, great orator, and seen as one of the most intelligent people in this country, from an artistic standpoint, who I admire. But I also think he's got an incredible memory, you know, and probably retains everything. That then references back to the spectrum and memory, and then we talk about AI and the machine that ultimately has the best memory you could ever have. Well, I was trialing a CRM recently, and you know, the art of a good recruiter is having a good memory, is being able to pluck out ideas from your network all the time, and then we use machines and databases to help us with that. But a lot of those machines are only as good as your ability to use them. And I trialed one recently that uses large language models, and if you have a database of, let's say, 10,000 people, you talk to the CRM and you ask it questions, and it's as if it's someone who just knows everyone there and remembers everything about every single person in that 10,000 person database. And you have a conversation. I'm looking for someone that does this. Who do we know here? And it brings it out. This question of augmenting memory is massively important. In terms of moving on from the intuitive skills, and trusting whether someone can do the job rather than based on what they say. Again, that's based on numerous data points. Trying to figure out if someone is truthful and has integrity. I mean, this is the most important thing to get right before you do anything else. Is this person who they say they are? And often, I mean, I talk to clients who say, we hired this person who said they were fantastic and could do this, and they got on the job and actually they couldn't do any of it. You've got to question what happened, what went wrong, and did they just listen to the facts?
Validating claims, validating personality and vocational capability.
My narrative for years and years has been honesty in recruitment is the best way forward for everyone. Literally, for a business to be incredibly honest about what that business can offer someone and what that opportunity is and what that role is, and for a person to be transparent and honest. It doesn't mean that you reveal your inner soul and you know, someone has to know every last detail, but it's about shining a light in the right places and being truthful about that. Again, many times I've heard someone say, I was in a job and it was missold. It wasn't what I thought. I mean, why is that happening all the time? It's a waste of time for everyone involved. It's damaging. And it probably happens because a business, it's almost like hit and hope. Well, we won't kind of tell them the bad stuff because they don't really need to know that. Let's get them in here and then hopefully we can kind of paper over that and they'll be fine. Or there's loads of terrible stuff going on here we'll never hire anyone if we tell people. I mean, there are ways of dealing with negative aspects in a business or in a role, and for a person. You know, I've been out of work for a year. Do I pretend I was working, or am I honest? I mean, I think honesty should trump everything else. And so, yeah, a lot of the work I do is to try and dig as deep as possible.
You know, looking where we are now post-COVID, the idea of having periods not in work, the idea of periods of doing multiple roles, doing things outside of the traditional, monodirectional progressive career, within IT or any other, feels actually a good thing now. Whereas I always used to have this perception that, you needed to kind of do this chronologically, sequentially, with no breaks. And any breaks were seen as a failure or a weakness or a dropout. Whereas I see so much disruption and reprioritization since COVID. People who have took time out to focus on family, travel, learn new things, relax, recover from some form of emotional burnout, maybe do multiple roles outside of that trajectory and getting into more customer-facing roles or physical roles outside. Like, there's a whole diversity of opportunities that I believe are hugely positive when it comes to this idea of progressive vocational capability that traditionally maybe would have seen as a derailment or an offshoot or a little parking space. I see when people coming back into roles after a period of travel or family, they're renewed, refreshed, open to learning. In some ways, that reset, I think, can be seen as a good thing, not something they need to hide.
One of the good aspects of COVID was that it brought some humanity into the workplace, because we all were suddenly at home and our families were standing behind us and we became human. I saw the business world for years and years as being completely separate to your personal life. And we talk about work-life balance, and they're separate. They shouldn't really converge. But actually, again, relevant to this conversation about AI, we should be hiring human beings to do human work and augment with technology because they're human, not because we actually want to hire automatons and people who can be divorced from their kind of human outside of work life. One thing I'm always interested in when I talk to people, when I'm meeting potential candidates, is everything about their working life, and I am interested in what life is like outside. I've seen clients walk away from candidates who didn't seem to have any life outside of work, and they said, I'm all about work, like I'm a machine. What you're hiring is someone that's going to give 100%. And that actually put them off, bizarrely. And there was a time where most businesses would say, that's what we want. We want someone who's a machine, who's going to come in and, they're not going to work 24/7, but as close to that as they possibly can. But that actually put that business off because they wanted a rounded human being. And I think that's massively important and hugely positive, because if we're going to differentiate between AI in business and in the workplace and what we bring, we need to find the differences. For there to be a positive future, we need to be working in harmony together, where the machine and the human are symbiotic and not one against the other, because that's also going to happen. The machine is going to make people redundant, literally. And I think the chief of staff at Anthropic recently said that we've got about 3 years left of normal desk-based work. And this worries me and scares me massively. whether it's true or not, I don't know. And the fact is, no one really knows anything. I said I've got 3 children. So as I'm looking at careers in the workplace and technology and how technology is disrupting the workplace, I naturally think, how do I advise my children? How do I push them towards a career that's safe? And funnily enough, I grew up originally wanting to be an actor, and I was for a while.
What did you act in?
I was in a sitcom. I did a couple of very low budget movies. I did some.
Do anything that I'll recognise?
Probably not. There was a sitcom on Channel 4 called Small Potatoes.
Small Potatoes. Okay.
I was on with Jalili's son. But
were you peaking then, Mark? Were you peaking?
It was great fun, and I consciously moved away from it, partly because acting is seen as a very insecure and not massively lucrative career to have if you want to have a family and a normal life.
But it feels like acting, sports, that they're things that are so compelling when you're young, but very few prevail.
Well, ironically, stage acting, to advise someone when I was a child that stage acting is a career was probably wrong. It was not recommended. Now I'm thinking it's probably one of the safest jobs there is. Do it. like AI is not going to take over your,
Hollywood seems concerned about the replacement of human actors with digital entities. And the whole intellectual property challenge around AI using voices, the OpenAI Scarlett Johansson. I don't remember the specifics around it, but there seemed to be a suggestion that who actually owns your identity and your voice, and a digital representation that is got the equivalent triggers that would make a listener think that they will listen to that. Is that morally, ethically, legally, financially right? I don't know what the answers are, but I can see a blurring between the human identity and digital identity.
Definitely a concern, because that's digital identity, which is why I made a point of saying stage acting. It's analog. People standing in front of you, stand-up comedy. These things that were traditionally seen as risky careers are probably less risky now. But yeah, digital identity and Hollywood stars selling their IP for when they're dead.
And on this, it's Dana White, the UFC, talked about how live sports are just creating so much growth and traction. And I completely agree. Other than like Premier League football, rugby, live sport, I absolutely love to watch. It's pretty much exclusively what I watch now. I don't really like anything that's constructed. But last year I had the experience of seeing Darren Brown on stage. Yeah. What a fantastic, visceral, sensory experience. That even that fact that I was with other people in an audience, like the basics, the things that some of us have forgotten, sitting in front of screens on our own or with friends, just being in an audience that is universally wowed by a spectacle that's occurring in front of them, I found a extremely compelling experience. And from that, I take the kids to Premier League football games. We went to see Barcelona. I really enjoy live sport and the concept of a group that are enjoying this single thing, which I just cannot find anywhere near the joy in any form of digital consumption.
Yeah. Well, this is it. The live experience. Darren Brown, a massive amazing hero of mine. And that's what's safe. Going back to advising my children on, if they ask me, what should I do? Where do you advise me to go? I don't think anyone really knows the answer. I think what worries me is schools haven't got a clue. They're not addressing AI. So I have a 17-year-old. I read a survey that 1,000 young people were asked about AI, and the majority of them don't use it or didn't really know how to use it. I think something like 70%, whatever it is. So I did a poll my 3 children. What do you think of AI? Do you use it? And my 17-year-old son said he is terrified of it, hates it, doesn't want to use it. And my middle child said, no, I don't know, I think could be good, but doesn't have an opinion and probably listen to his older brother. And my youngest said, I have no opinion, don't care, not interested. He should, he really should, he's 11. The school should be saying, things are going to change, and actually this is, I mean, education should be changing. I'm certain that we're too late almost, or we're really behind as a country, but even in the world, I don't think any government's addressing this well. He's fairly artistic, and so when I produce music, or I use Midjourney a lot. I love Midjourney.
Can we just let me just stay on children and education for a second?
Yeah.
This fear of your eldest in AI, what are they frightened of?
I think he is frightened of literal human redundancy. He has emerging
I think
abilities.
we're all frightened of human redundancy.
Yeah, I mean, job redundancy, but human redundancy.
Do you think that's a real fear? Do you think that's, it's a real fear, absolutely. Is it a objective risk of human redundancy in vocation?
I think it is. I think we're in denial. I think we're all putting our fingers in our ears going, la, 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 it will all be fine. And maybe it will. And maybe AI will cure cancer.
Because I was looking at some numbers, and I think it was, and these are unverified, I've read it and trusted it, it was from someone like Menlo Ventures, saying that the top, I think, 10 AI companies aggregate value of over $22 billion.
Yeah.
With a run rate revenue of less than $100 million, which is, I think, 200x multiplier on valuation.
Right.
Now, if you look at traditional tech startups that are building off wholly owned intellectual property, 7 to 10 multiplier on revenue feels a traditional multiplier metric on the acquisition of that company, because if you can grow it, you're going to get your money back. 7 to 10 multipliers feel right. 200x multipliers on AI. Someone in the financial system believes, I think in some ways to support your argument, that these technologies are going to grow absolutely exponentially.
Yeah.
And so there is a huge future belief that this stuff's going to take over. And if you look at their application within workflow optimization, customer experience, human-esque interactions, creative, copywriting, legal, that 22 billion of perceived value, that's where it's going to come from. And it does, the money people do think we're either going to be doing a whole load more work that requires this technology so much more because we're just productive as a planet, or there's going to be a displacement of human labor. It feels.
Yeah.
Because I don't understand those valuations.
I mean, obviously no one can see how this is going to play out at all.
How do you look to comfort your son in this shadow of a dystopian human redundancy? If I was using your words, which I kind of feel like...
Well, I asked him yesterday...
Which this is going to be a mental health crisis.
Yeah.
Unless this can be, the narrative around this can be managed and handled.
Yeah, I asked him yesterday, how do you feel about AI? Knowing that he doesn't engage with it when I run in the room and say, look at this. And I haven't rationalized his response here. I don't know how to deal with that. I think what I am doing is saying, carry on doing what you're doing. Do your A-levels, go to university. But there's definitely a slight feeling of doom when I'm talking, and I'm at that point planning careers and planning university. Like, am I going to tell him completely the wrong thing and send him down a dead end? Should I advise my middle son who likes animals to be a vet? Because I mean, analog careers are where it's at, and doctors and nurses are fairly safe. I don't think teachers are safe at all.
I am seeing the rise, indeed, probably recruiting for prompt engineering, where I see, you know, AI as a toolbox, still that needs to be led through some form of hierarchy of strategy, to shape these outcomes with these tools through a bigger strategy, right, that sits above kind of everything. A little bit like fire. We probably, when we discovered fire, we probably got a little bit burned. We probably burned a forest down. We probably burned one of our family. You know, we kind of discovered it and learned it, and we kind of realized that fire is an extremely powerful asset. However, needs to be in a form where humans are educated. You know, never touch matches. You know, we control it. We don't, you know, smoke or use our phones when we're putting combustible materials in our vehicles. You know, but within the vehicle, we're using fire to create propulsion. You know, so fire has become, whilst it's something that we were extremely frightened of back in Neanderthal and early stages of discovery, this discovery phase, actually, I think, you know, we coexist with fire pretty well. You know, the whole human race only exists because of the sun, which is fire and heat, so we've managed to. Whilst in the early days it was probably a little bit bumpy in our understanding our relationship, we've got to a point where we know its potential power and therefore we contain it and we manage it. And sometimes, you know, we'll have a wildfire and that can be associated with one of the most existential threats of all, which is climate change. In fact, fire is a representation of climate change. So our ultimate existential threat, which everybody's extremely frightened of, is this thing that the reality is actually something that as human beings we've learned to control. And the existential threat is that it's actually out of control. Maybe with AI, we'll get to a point where it's contained and we control and manage it. And our existential threat becomes it becoming unmanageable.
I'd like to think so, but you know, harnessing fire is different because fire is immediately damaging, whereas generative AI doesn't feel immediately. You know, it feels additive and positive. I think it's just on a grand scheme, it's less so. So it's. I don't think we're going to be harnessing it quite as much as you would a lion or fire, because it doesn't feel. I think it's those people that are thinking a few steps ahead recognize that it needs to be harnessed, and definitely, you know, governance and laws need to be put in place to harness it. But that's, I don't know.
And the AI Act is coming through, and there's going to be additional regulation. Let me talk. So, you know, the clients that you work with. And the businesses that you support on their journey. There was a point I thought when you were talking earlier about in the process of connecting people to businesses and opportunities, there was this whole concept of culture, and what does culture really mean, and like how do you align people and assess people for a cultural fit? You know, culture in terms of business culture. And I was interested to know a little bit more about that. And one point would be the businesses you recruit for, are they bringing in this idea of it's okay to be augmented as part of their culture? Because there's a lot of people, like one of our YouTube videos is actually us talking about, I believe everybody's using ChatGPT but doesn't want to talk about it. It's been universally disliked. Everybody who's looked at it has disliked it. And I was trying to think, why? Most of our videos are quite well liked. This one is 100% dislike, which all I can think is it's triggered a defensive response. The people are using it, but almost they still refuse to want people to know that they're actually augmented by ChatGPT or other AI tools. I mean, so culture. I would love to. I don't want to. This is so important. I'd love to get your insights. On that fit.
I mean, lots of things, and I don't think that the culture conversation and when we're getting to know a business and discussing what that culture is, which is multi-strand, has not yet covered this augmentation and how someone comes in and sits within a framework of AI and human skills. That's not something that is classed under culture yet, I don't think, and maybe should be. And they'll say, we've just gone through an assessment on our values. And we've surveyed our business, and we've had a think tank created, and we now we have these pillars. These are our values. They define our culture. That's one aspect, but that's defined by them. There's also an external view of a culture, and there's small things that define your culture. And coming back to COVID, hybrid versus office work massively defines culture these days. In some negative and some positive ways. But when someone says, that business, what's its culture like? I mean, they're asking 50 different questions.
In one question.
In one question. So to be able to match a person and their ability to sit within a culture is to define what that culture is based on what they think it is, what you think it is, and lots of other aspects. And it is important. And again, because an organization wants to hire a human being now and not just a worker, culture becomes important. Culture was never in the conversation 10 years ago. When I started in recruitment about 15 years ago, I don't think culture was.
You hear this idea of toxic and toxic cultures.
It was
now.
either toxic or not toxic.
Yeah,
that was it. Is this a good business?
What does toxic culture mean?
I think it means a lack of respect and care for the people that sit beneath you and maybe above, and this concept of it, a fish stinks from its head. The CEO being toxic will create a toxic culture, which is probably.
And I wonder
fair.
what toxic is. Toxic setting expectations that are undeliverable, or is toxic taking credit for other people's work? Like what is? Because I hear toxic social media.
Yeah.
Toxic has become an increasingly consumed word, which is intimidating in many ways because it's kind of undefining what it is. But what would you say? So if you were analysing a company, how would you analyse that it had a healthy culture?
Yeah. Well, toxic is toxic to that person. One person's toxic might not be toxic to everyone. Again, that's
Values.
part of the, how do you assess that there is probably an individual for each business, whatever that level of toxicity that there is, because there are people that aren't affected by certain things in that culture. It may be that we want you in this office 5 days a week, 8:30 till 6:30. That's the rule.
Some people
will call that toxic.
So toxic in some ways is something that's adverse to your personal value set.
I mean, there will definitely be real toxic behaviours around disrespect.
Yeah, absolutely.
And disrespecting, race, religion, and sex, but there will be toxic cultures.
So there's discrimination is one thing.
Discrimination will be
which AI bias and discrimination is a fascinating subject.
Yeah,
which we talk about on another recorded podcast. But I think that toxic culture, more if we take away the almost table stakes of removing any discrimination, toxic culture feels like like for example, a culture of competitiveness could be seen as optional, and there are people who will thrive in a highly competitive environment.
Yeah,
and there will be people who do not thrive in a competitive environment. So in some ways, competitiveness could be toxic to one person but not to another. Does that feel? Yeah,
exactly. Or there's no upward mobility in this business because people want to use you for your skill set but not enhance you and develop you as a person. And to my point, this business doesn't care who I am and what I bring from the outside. They just care about the output of my work. Some people, that's okay. They don't want to bring everything to the table. They just want to be, the worker at work, and others want to feel like they're in a community.
As you're speaking, I'm reflecting. The whole idea of a machine learning algorithm is it takes a retrospective data set and then it applies to prospective view. It feels like in your role, every single person has a unique requirement from you. And therefore, in some ways, any generalized, normalized outcome from machine learning or generative AI, it might do 80% of the heavy lifting, but there's this 20% and 20%, making 120%, so let's say 10%, 10% at the front and the back that is truly unique to that human that AI could not possibly predict because it's generalized, it's using a generalized data set, which suggests to me that everybody requires some form of customized process, alignment, identification.
And people want that.
I think so.
I think, I mean, it depends how transactional a job requirement is. But like I said, recruiters are moving more upstream. At some point, there has to be human interaction. There has to be someone who has the checks and balances. But that's moving further and further upstream. I found a software that runs first stage phone interviews. It's all automated.
Wow.
It's all AI. It's something I never thought would happen. And I thought, as I'm going through my career as a recruiter, thinking, how safe is my job? Well, talking to people and doing an interview, AI can't do that. Oh no, it can. And it is. And I'm not sure people want that. I'm not sure from a candidate experience perspective, that's something anyone wants. I don't think anyone really wants to be assessed, like I said, on the psychometric test, by a non-human because they're scared that something can go wrong. Clearly, the same can happen with a human, and there are plenty of humans that are terrible at recruitment and miss great people or do the wrong thing. But to have a phone interview with AI,
it's dehumanizing the human.
Yeah.
Dehumanizing. Not that I really want to admit it, Mark, but I did enjoy the George Clooney film Up in the Air.
Oh yeah.
Which was an amazing analysis of human machine and remote. It's probably before its time.
Yeah.
In terms of, I think it was probably a pre-COVID film. So in some ways it projected onto these digital transactions. I think it was in the form of mass redundancies in North America. And there was like new people who wanted to use tools and this, I think Clooney played like not a legacy person, but felt the need to do the human touch. And it's just I thought it was a really good film that was really complex, but skinned in quite a non-threatening way. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, and I still think about it now in some ways.
Yeah, I remember that film well. I mean, when it comes to recruitment, there will be endless ways that AI will support it and make it better for everyone. But both from a recruiter perspective and from a candidate perspective. And there are tools now that if you're job seeking, incredibly helpful. Like you said, writing a CV for you, but actually being able to automate jobs to you that fit you specifically, or looking at a job description and it rewriting your CV to fit that job description. That helps from a candidate perspective. From a recruitment perspective, there's endless tools that we can use that help and augment the work. But what I really hope is that we don't lose the ability as humans to connect people, and that's what it is. I mean, recruiters are matchmakers. And we've already moved into this online dating world. We don't need human matchmakers anymore. It can just be done. So perhaps recruitment can just be done online and that's it. But I think it's too complex to cut the middleman out.
I think as we move to the end of the conversation, I think there's one area I'd like to touch on before we get to Utopia or Dystopia.
Yeah.
For people looking for a role right now, what are the top 2 or 3 things you would advise them to consider in the recruitment process?
One thing I try to make very clear to people is I don't think people are as interested in what you did anymore. What job did you have? It's what was the impact? What was the net effect of that? It's all very well to list, and many people do. These are responsibilities I had. I don't think anyone cares. We don't want to know what your job description was. We want to know what, and I keep using the word human because of the context of this, but what did you as a human contribute to that? And how can I see that being useful for the role moving forward? If you, and it's not just about revenue, and a lot of the roles I work on have very specific metrics and performance indicators that show, okay, this is what I did. But it's someone needs to figure out beyond that, what did I bring? That's how you know how to articulate what you bring to the next role. So impact is massively important. If we're thinking about the future of AI in recruitment, automation is going to be looking for key skills and keywords and codifying things. So I think people do need to start thinking about, how do I line up with that? You know, I need to define my skills so that an algorithm can see it.
Interesting.
Sadly, which is why I think people will fall through the gaps, talent will fall through the gaps, but also on a wider digital basis around their entire kind of digital online presence, that recruitment will start to assess everything you've put out there, which is scary, especially when we start thinking about young people. And, you know, from here on in, your digital footprint is what you're going to be assessed on. Especially
when it's a component of algorithmic distribution. You know, it's trends and components of these platforms, whether it's Spotify, LinkedIn now, they use algorithms to distribute that content based on triggers. So, you know, understanding that is so important, I think, from a technology perspective.
So to bring it right back to what we were talking about with acting, one thing that is seen as a negative is being typecast. Someone looks at me and thinks, oh, you're always that guy. You're always the bad guy. You're always the soppy hero. In many ways, flipping that into recruitment and job seeking, it's a good thing. If someone can typecast you and define you, it's really going to help you. If someone comes to me and says, this is who I am, and I think, okay, I can go and talk to a CEO or a CRO and say, this is this person, this is what they bring, this is their impact, it's going to help. If that's wishy-washy, if it's hard to define who that person is, they are going to fall through the cracks. Again, both because a human won't be able to define them, and nor will the AI. So sharpening up who you are and what you bring, and
essential,
and what's your impact is massively essential. And I think everyone should be honing their AI skill set, because the longer we can hold on to kind of joint custody of our skills, the better.
Mark, as somebody who is really at the cutting edge of this human-machine interface, not only in helping organizations leveraging and build their own AI tools, but also aligning people to roles within the vocation of building AI, and the macro of human versus AI in terms of economic feasibility and sustainability. You seem to be in this unique position, and you come across extremely thoughtful, which has been quite inspiring, really, the way you're almost mentally tussling yourself with these challenges, which, as anybody who's looking to leverage AI, I would suggest they need to speak to you about how they create an amazing workforce. But in the context of what we've talked about, very simply, do you believe the current trajectory of AI in human will lead to a utopia or dystopia?
Now, I thought you would ask me this. It's impossible to answer that because we don't know. And I want to say utopia because that's the kinder answer. And I want to say to my son, it's all going to be fine. But I think it's almost safer to think it could be dystopia, because then we start to work against that and figure out how to mitigate against dystopia. If we all just rose-tinted spectacles, I think we get swallowed up. So I mentioned AI curing cancer. I mean, that would be utopian. AI cures all disease, and we're all healthy, and we all become fitter. Great, but at what cost? And I think it's going to be a balancing act. I think AI is going to do as much damage as it might do good. And we need to be prepared for that, and we need to think about it, and we need to talk about it, and we need to figure it out. And humans, we're all, that's what's connecting us. We should all be trying to figure out how to successfully move forward without getting swallowed up and trampled on the way.